This is the final Marvel Snap meta report of the season. The meta has changed a lot in the last week. We have the tier 1 decks as well as all of the tier 2 decks with refined lists. Give the video a like if it's helpful and don't forget to subscribe for more Snap content. Tier 1 decks are Thanos and Shuri. There's a couple iterations of Thanos. The Shuri list is pretty settled on at this point, and they are quite a way above the rest of the decks in the meta. A lot of the tier 2 decks are just decks which can get victories against these decks, but it's very difficult to find a deck which beats both of them. The new Thanos deck has changed quite a bit. The previous Thanos list, which we saw the most, and I put this one in tier 1.5 because it's not as popular anymore, is a Zoo style deck using Blue Marvel, using Khazar. This is Harry's list that he won the New York City tournament with a Valkyrie as well. But the more common one that you're seeing much more on ladder now, I'm sure, is the one with Sunspot, Wave, and a bunch of big cards. Kang can also slot into this list very successfully in replacement of either Blue Marvel or Devil Dinosaur. Kang in this one is good because if you thin it with your Lockjaw, it's basically just like a free bit of thinning. You just have an 11 card deck instead. Of course, 16 cards with the Infinity Stones. So Kang's a no-brainer if you've got him in this one. One weakness of Kang is he's bad against Leech, which is very popular, but this deck is usually pretty good against Leech because you can get a Leech of your own on in turn 4. That's a key thing with this deck. The Leech on turn 4 is pretty incredible. You get the Energy Stone on turn 3, meaning on turn 4 you have 5 energy. You play the Leech early, potentially even into your Lockjaw location, and it's pretty much GG at that point. You should certainly be snapping, and it is incredibly obnoxious. Leech, kind of the most powerful card in this deck. Of course, Aero is unbelievable as well as Thanos and Lockjaw of all the Infinity Stones. This is the best deck in the game in my opinion. I do think it's better than Shuri. However, Shuri definitely can put up a serious fight against this, but a World-Time Leech is incredibly devastating even for Shuri decks. Okay, they have Red Skull, they might have Titania and other things, but if you can hit their Taskmaster and Zola, it is really limiting the amount of points they can have. The Shang-Chi is also a cheeky inclusion. Of course, it can be bad if you find Shang-Chi off of Lockjaw, but often you're just able to play that Shang-Chi for some really good value later on, potentially even into your Lockjaw lane. And again, as I mentioned, the introduction of Kang makes this deck even better quite significantly. It's the best deck in the game in my opinion. If you want to see gameplay with the Kang version, I did post it on my YouTube channel yesterday. Up next, we have Shuri in tier 1. Of course, there's still a few different builds you can go with. With Shuri, you can go down the route of Sauron. I've always been quite adamant that Sauron would be a terrible card to craft because the best Shuri deck doesn't play it, and I have been proven right in that. So make sure you're looking out for those token guides because I did tell people to avoid Sauron, and that has definitely been proved worth it. Sauron is just not good, not worth it. Instead of playing Sauron, you get to play Cosmo, because of course Sauron cancels out the Cosmo. The main thing with this one is you're going to play Cosmo into the location that you then play your Red Skull on turn 5. This means that your Red Skull can't get Shang-Chi'd, and then you just play Taskmaster and something else on turn 6. Of course, you do need to be wary of your opponent's Aero pulling your cards into a location that you might be losing, but that's another reason where Red Skull into the Cosmo lane is so good because your opponent can't Aero into that Red Skull lane just to get an easy win. You can also do the things with She-Hulk where you don't play a card on turn 5 and then She-Hulk plus a card on 6. Again, you need to be very careful of Aero if you do go for that line though. The armor helps protect you. The Zero and Titania are both good options to play on turn 6 alongside something like Red Skull or Taskmaster even. And the Captain Marvel's in there because she's a bit of an anti-Aero play as well. If you do go for the She-Hulk and another card, it's often going to be Captain Marvel to help you beat the Aero. Arnim Zola you could replace. I personally just think it's very good to include as just a nice little backup option to catch some people off guard and get some nice easy wins. So that's the tier 1 decks. Moving on to tier 2, we have Galactus next. Galactus is a card I still don't own, and Kang is making an appearance in this one because Kang, I think, is actually just a crucial card in Galactus. The reason I think Kang is so good in a lot of decks is you can just kind of put it in the deck and it's going to be good. Like you could put it in the Shuri deck and it would probably be quite solid. However, in Galactus, it is just incredibly strong because of being able to play it on that turn. You would usually Galactus. You can go Electro into Galactus, but you can just check that your opponent's not going to Cosmo you, not going to Aero you with a Kang play, meaning you get a pretty safe snap. Of course, you get to snap with your Kang as well, and your opponent might just retreat anyway. So Kang, very, very good card. Again, I don't have Galactus. This is Jeff Hoogan's list. It looks pretty solid to me. It has most of the cards I would want to see. Yondu for that synergy with Null. No Spider-Man in here, which is one card I would maybe like to see. He's gone for Psylocke over Wave, which I think makes a lot of sense. I definitely like the Shuri, the Dr. Octopus. I think maybe if it was me, I would try and get Spider-Man in there, perhaps instead of the Lizard. But Lizard is also giving you nice value on the Null. And a lot of the time, you don't need to go for the Spider-Man because you often end up Galactusing on turn 5, I believe, anyway. So, very cool deck. Big problem this one has is it's very susceptible to Leech. And that is going to be a common theme when we look at these tier 2 decks. A lot of them really do struggle against Leech gameplay. Next, we have Sandman in tier 2. It's just an Electro ramp. I've called it Sandman because Sandman's the newly buffed card. Yeah, this deck's okay. It struggles against Thanos. It struggles quite a bit often against the Shuri deck. I do actually think this deck should play Leech, probably instead of the Heimdall. I'm going to update that in the description. I meant to put Leech in here. Leech is very good against the Shuri decks. Potentially, you can Leech on 4. Then they get a Red Skull, which is free to go, though. So, yeah, it's not ideal even then. That's the main reason this deck is not much better than a lower tier 2. And again, a lot of these tier 2 decks are significantly worse than the tier 1 decks, I think, because it is just not very good into the top 2 decks in the meta, which is Thanos and Shuri. I would avoid playing this one, but certainly worth mentioning. Next, we have a sleeper deck for the season, which lots of people aren't playing, and it is a Lockjaw deck. Why is Lockjaw good? Well, it's worse than Thanos Lockjaw, which is the top deck in the meta, but this is one of the few decks which is somewhat anti-Leech, because if you get leeched, you can still play your Infinite on turn 6. Your Jane Foster is not so bad. Your Aero is not so bad. You've got a leech of your own potentially. You can also get turn 4 leech with this deck through Jubilee and Lockjaw. So you have a turn 4 potential leech of your own, less consistently, of course. So this is a very strong deck, I think. It's one of the most, probably the most underrated deck in the game right now. The issue with it is, of course, is if you have Thanos, Thanos is just kind of a better version of this one. So that's why you're not seeing much of it. Next, we have another surprise inclusion. This is Coco's deck from the Marvel Snap New York City tournament. I was very impressed with this deck. It did a good job against Shuri decks. The idea is you can Professor X to stop Captain Marvel or something like that moving in there. You have the Daredevil to lock down a location, and you just try and win the other location with a Shang-Chi, or moving the Magneto, or using Magneto to move your opponent's Cosmo onto their Taskmaster on turn 6, for example. So it was a very interesting list that I did want to share with you. I think the issue with this one is I don't see how this is beating Thanos decks, unfortunately. But a very interesting list nonetheless. It's going to struggle against Leech as well, so yeah. Next we have, and this is the final list, 2 Serra control lists which are very similar. One with Dark Hawk, one without. I'm leaning towards the one without at the moment. You could also add Nova into this one because you play Killmonger. Again, the huge issue with this one, even though you can beat both Thanos and Shuri, is Leech. Leech is just devastating for this deck. It completely shuts you down. Even a turn 5 Leech is a nightmare, and these Thanos decks can Leech on turn number 4. You're going to play Serra, they're going to play Leech, you lose the game. So this is why, again, it's not any higher up. Goose is particularly strong against Shuri decks. You can Goose the Cosmo lane on turn number 4 when they play Shuri. This is going to stop them being able to play their Red Skull into the Cosmo, meaning that your Shang-Chi is much more easy to get a target. You also have Absorbing Man for double Shang-Chi potentially. The other very interesting thing you can do with this one is you can play Aero, and then on turn 6, you can go Absorbing Man and Shang-Chi with Zabu down on the board, which means that your Absorbing Man copies Aero, and then you can Shang-Chi, and if you're going second, you pull your opponent's card into the Absorbing Man lane, and then you get to Shang-Chi it. So very interesting stuff with this one. Again, big issue with it is the Leech. Thor is one of the most replaceable cards as well. You just kind of need some points from somewhere, and Thor gives you like a backup target for Absorbing Man potentially, because you can play Thor, and then the Hammer on 6 plus the Absorbing Man. Also, you can use the Absorbing Man on Drax, which is why it makes the cut, because it's just a 3 energy card with Zabu down. If you have Serra down, it's going to cost 2 energy. And with Zabu and Serra, you can also go Aero and Shang-Chi on turn 6. So it's got lots of nice plays. The reason it's not any better and not a tier 1 deck, obviously the top 2 decks are so good, but this could be a tier 1 deck if it wasn't for Leech. But Leech really does shut this one down. And a similar, very similar list is a Dark Hawk version of this. I think I prefer the version without Dark Hawk. Main reason is this list suffers because you can't play Maximus. Maximus and Dark Orc have big anti-synergy, and that just feels a little bit wonky. But this one's nice still. You have Black Widow, Rockslide, and Dark Orc in there instead of Maximus, Angela, Thor. So pretty similar lists. You could also add Thor into this one instead of maybe the Drax. The Absorber Man can definitely be quite clunky in these lists as well, but I do think it's worth it just for the nice things you can do. This is the end of the meta report. Again, the top 2 decks, very much of this meta. Probably the most unbalanced meta we've had since Silver Surfer. Zabu, moreover. The Zabu meta, I think, was, you know, one real top deck, and then Silver Surfer was also good. Whereas this one, I think Shuri and Thanos are both very, very good, but like just leagues above of everything else. So it does feel kind of like a callback to that meta. Honestly, I want to say this one might just be worse just because of how Leech makes things so difficult to counter. Having said that, Zabu was also kind of impossible to counter. And I don't think this is really a knock on Leech. It's just the fact that this deck can have all these points and still play Leech and still have all these points is where I think why this is the best deck in the game. Hope you guys enjoyed the video. Give it a like if you do. And do you agree with me that Thanos is better than Shuri? Is there any other tier 2 decks you think I've missed out on? There's a bunch of tier 3 decks I could have mentioned, like Deathwave. I think Deadpool's okay. Both of those just completely lose to Leech on the spot and suck against Aero as well. So that's why I didn't mention those. Any others you think I could have snuck into tier 2? Maybe Patriot? Let me know. See you on the next one.